Well, hello, hello. It seems to be 1 o'clock, and somebody's just started mowing outside. So let's see if that carries through. Anyway, it's lovely to see you. Gosh, we're almost up to 30 people. And it's really lovely. There's some inane chat going on. Thank you so much for coming and being so jolly. And it's lovely if you comment. It's lovely if you just sit and watch. And of course, towards the end, come and join me in the Zoom room, as I've got some really lovely clips for you today. Because it's been a while, several recommendations that I've been holding on to for this occasion. And also, I want to look at a few clips from a DVD of conductors at work with amateur musicians, plus one cathedral conductor. Not appropriate, I think, to play through general Facebook because the permission would be needed. It's a really interesting DVD pointing straight at the conductor as they try to get singers to do what they want and keep their hair on. The DVD is old. It often crashes my computer, so it could be the first session that kind of goes up in a puff of smoke. Anyway, thank you for all your support and the encouragement to come back, actually. I hope you're having something tasty. I've got some veggie burgers in the oven. Lucky me. I'm also feeling a little bit optimistic today because I've had my first dose of vaccine. And I think for all of us, we're looking, all musicians in this period, we're all looking for these returned confidence and this ability to get back together in a room. Some side effects, but everybody has them. But I'm feeling more or less back to normal and looking forward to getting the second dose and feeling more reassured in a space with people. And I hope you're doing all right too. It's been a really tough time. The Renaissance Singers are going to resume rehearsals tentatively in mid-May when it's legal again. One of the great things about this period is the ability still to attend online events that you normally would be excluded from. And most university departments in the UK have opened their seminar sessions, their research seminars, to outsiders. And it can be very difficult to find them, to poke around on the music department websites or get onto very abstruse mailing lists. And in among the 700 emails for conferences and things you've never heard of, you get these little gems. And this week I've been to a really excellent seminar at the University of York, which was a paper given by Steph Connor, who I've mentioned before. We worked with her as our Adopt a Composer person in 2013 in Waltham Abbey. I did talk about that project. She gave such an interesting paper on Babylonian song, where the only surviving evidence of the musical practice are the texts and these stone tablets with lettering which indicates maybe string tuning. And it was so interesting really listening to her and thinking about this complete lack of evidence and how she has to still, with the imperative of performance, come up with something that's, convincing, but also compelling and emotional and in the now. And it sets all sorts of tensions up, that kind of work, because it reminds us that when we're doing musicology, we're completely beholden to the symbol of music, to the documentary evidence. We're still really positivists at heart. And the less stuff there is, the less inclined scholars tend to be to speculate. But if we want this music to live again, these Babylonian songs from 6 centuries BC, then we need to be creative. And Steph is a performer and a composer. And so effectively she's rearranging this music or speculating with the limited amount of material. And she's working in a sort of folk jazz way with what she has. And I thought it really pulled into sharp focus the kind of dilemmas that we face in 16th century music, early modern music, when we chafe against the paradigms of musicology, which are so desperately embedded, really, in a very small geographical and chronological area, namely in Austro-Germany and the 19th century, really the Romantic aesthetic. The emphasis being on absolute music as a freestanding, abstract art, and also the idea that those symbols that the composer has put down and manipulated into a structure contain a sort of emotional truth, the subjective truth, the idea of individual genius. And this concept is Werktreue. I'm sorry, Simona, you could pronounce that properly. The problem with these models is they exclude all the stuff that we might want to talk about on the side: folk music, jazz, pop, improvisation, or even just French and Italian and English and Spanish music, which doesn't fit the Austro-German romantic paradigm. So all hats off really to Steph, and check out her CD. I can put a link later. The other thing I've been doing, of course, is doing online sessions, making videos, something I'd never done with any concentration before the pandemic. And I got really lost, and agreeably lost, in the creative process of making 5 lectures for Run by Singers over the last fortnight, particularly when they had to be delivered. And I hope you'll look out for, if you don't mind me making a plug, look out for that Avila, Taste of Avila publicity. I think it's £30. I'll be live on the first and last occasions, but they're released every day for a week, the first full week of May, and Run by Singers will hedge them round with some history and some cuisine. And so I think there might be a sense, while we can't get on a plane, that actually you sort of transport yourself there culturally, and actually just exploring both Victoria and his lesser known contemporaries was such a joy. Even works that you feel you really know and they're done and dusted, when you go back and you have to explain them again, looking deeper into the context and what the composer's life was like, actually you get a renewed sense of this real person. One of the things, incidentally, that's really struck me with Victoria is his lack of suffering in his life. I mean, he did suffer. He had some tragedies, and I'm sure in an age before anaesthetic and modern medicine and so forth, he suffered as everybody did. It's easy to romanticise the past, but as it goes, he did very well with his positions, his patronage and his income. And he was recognised in his own time. And then last night I was giving a private session to a group, and we were talking about the music of Rebelo, who is a wonderful, wayward Portuguese genius from the early 17th century, and particularly looking at his Lamentations. And he's another one who's friend of King John, who I will mispronounce now as Schwau, King John IV. And he was so well looked after. And I actually realised that there was a pang of regret in my breast about this, because I thought, oh, they're supposed to suffer, these composers, particularly Rebelo, whose music is so Gesualdo-like. It's tortured, it's chromatic, it's really extreme and thrilling, but often very unreasonable, difficult to encompass in a voice. It goes off down rabbit holes. And you want to think that this is the product either of a tortured mind or of a life well lived, knocking against experience. But in both cases, these musicians had the time and the leisure and the security to get on with experimentation or service of music. And in Victoria's case, I suppose one doesn't detect suffering, but what one does detect is an immense sincerity, a dedication and a selflessness. This is one of the things I wanted to talk about today. It's been on my mind because I think, in a way, we all should question our priorities. Conductors in particular can be driven by the wrong motivation. And I've often had conversations with students who are learning to conduct ensembles, and they're struggling with their security, their sense of self, being in front of a group of their peers and trying to get them to do what they want to do, which is really hard. And often, of course, the group ends up driving you because they move, they do something and then your hand moves because you're not confident. And that everything with conducting is about presaging what's about to happen, and then having the faith that the people will respond in like way, but also not being afraid to look too foolish. And a really useful conversation really is to identify in the student whether they're actually feeling the fear of judgment and they're thinking a lot about their ego. And actually, if you think about why you're doing this, why are you getting these people to make this music in this moment, that will help you to depart from that insecurity, and actually it will often unblock a lot of the nerves and let your creativity come through. Of course, you never can release yourself fully from this fear of judgment and shame, because you're standing in the middle of the group of people and your mistakes are going to be made in real time. But what is your motivation in making music? And the motivation surely should be a service of the music. And the danger then is that we then start to serve the notes and the symbols, and the Werktreu thing comes into play, and then we only leave ourselves the tiniest space for interpretation. And I think in professional situations, that is interpretation, and that's what audiences and critics then argue about. But in an amateur context, actually, or a church context, or something ceremonial where you're there for a reason to serve something, or a workshop where there's no performance pressure at the end, actually, you can put your motivation in a very different place, and you can ensure, I think, as a conductor who's bringing that professional ethos and preparation and skill set into the room, that your motivation is not about people thinking that you're brilliant at the music, that you know the most, that you have imposed yourself on the group and made the music as you wished, but actually that your motivation is to be in the service of the process of making. And this is, I know I return to this over and over again, but I think it's not taught enough, it's not explained enough. The priorities with an amateur or a workshop situation can allow us to lose ourselves in making, with the conductor as advocate for the highest possible standards always. The conductor should be an idealist, and they should consciously choose, I suppose, where to put the pressure in the situation. And if they put the pressure in the wrong place, it's often coming from ego, either from the pressure of a deadline, like a concert's just about to come, or the feeling that it's all going wrong and people are going to think much less of them as a conductor. It's a reflection on them. So I think the thing is never to obviously derogate your responsibility, but always to keep your sense that this is a shared enterprise and that you're working towards an ideal, a shining ideal of what this music could be. And what's difficult, I suppose, now is if we try to be inclusive and we might sell prizes for all kind of attitude, everyone in the room contributes, that might imply a sort of slightly wet, tolerance for poor engagement or poor outcomes. But actually, I think as long as the prizes seem to be collective, everyone's contribution can matter at the different levels without that being patronising, without that pulling the music down. So the conductor's job really is to release the best of everyone in the room so that they can serve the music and not serve him or her, I think, in that moment. And the reason is then that the conductor is trying almost to accomplish a sort of hypnotism by aligning everybody in the same activity, in the making, in the doing. So the conductor's greatest goal, in my opinion, is to entrain a group. And it is a form of hypnosis, because it's when your heartbeats settle, your breathing settles together, and there is a sense of flow, which means you lose track of time. And we can call that entrainment. But you might just think it like iron filings being aligned by a magnet. And then, of course, there's the danger of the magnet being the ego. But if the magnet is pointing towards something greater, and it's much easier with sacred music because you might point towards the divine, and even if you're not a believer, you're pointing towards something unknown and ineffable and spiritual and a yearning that we might all feel. But it's possible, of course, in secular music too, because we can point towards eternal questions of the human condition, what it is to suffer, to love, to feel joy and pain. And I think as long as the conductor is willing to be vulnerable towards those things, actually then the ego is deflated, because you've made a space to be in a way broken and wounded in front of the group. I mean in a spiritual sense. So it's not about puffing yourself up, it's about letting the music in, and then letting people do the same, because you're modelling it for them. I mean, these things are really difficult to describe, I suppose, but I think serving the music as an idealized object of worship in which the notes must be correct and the ensemble must be correct is insufficient, and it leads to a misplaced sense of priority. So that would be my headline, really. And if you are getting nervous as a director, then you've probably misplaced your motivation, and the other reason you might be nervous is that you haven't done enough preparation. So a well-prepared conductor shows respect to the group, and it shows respect to the music, right? And I would say at least as much time should be spent in preparation as is spent in the rehearsal itself. It's like an iceberg. There's more unseen. It can't just be someone who walks in and starts doing it. Equally, of course, singers and instrumentalists, if they've practiced, they bring those gifts of preparation to the rehearsal, and that's when the music can start. Because instead of taking up the bandwidth with note bashing and sight reading, we take up the bandwidth with expressivity and explorations of feeling and timbre and musical abstract things, which can be mapped onto human and emotional things. And in order to get to this, what the conductor needs to bring to the room actually is quite a lot of efficiency and authority, which comes hopefully out of that preparation and that leadership, that sense of humble leadership. But singers and instrumentalists need, boundaries. What's expected in this rehearsal? How long will it be? When will we start and stop? Should people be talking or moving about? What is our goal right now? So things are well organised, things are clear, expectations are set, and then they need inspiration and energising in waves, which can come in the form of technical help, emotional ideas, imagery, metaphor, and historical and contextual information, all feeding a machine, all feeding into the mincer to try and help people to energize themselves and align themselves into that activity. So my ideal rehearsal, really, it is a form of manipulation, it is a form of power, but it's one which can only properly be exercised, I think, with humility, because people can smell it a mile off if it's all about you. And I've sung for people like that, I've played for people like that, and although you might quite enjoy the music, ultimately it's not nourishing because you are serving them and not the thing beyond them. And the conductor's job really is to open a space beyond, behind, and around the music. So I hope that's a useful. I'm constantly grappling with this. I haven't properly formed my thoughts, but I've occasionally had those chats you have with former students, and it's really brilliant if you meet a student a few years after they've left university, and then they say to you, "Oh, we had that rehearsal and we talked about that thing, or we were in a coaching session," and you said, "Well, why?" Why are you nervous, or why didn't you prepare? And this then stays in their mind. And I had a lovely chat with somebody I really respect, a student who's now a conductor, and he said that the discussion about motivation and ego helped him so much. And I think he is humble, serene, curious, not complacent, not egotistical person. And I think the willingness to be wrong is something you have to embrace. But of course, like everybody else, I get insecure. I get very angry with people who aren't paying attention, haven't done their preparation, or just tired. And, there is a sort of attrition, isn't there, to hours and hours of rehearsal. It can set in on a day or a week together, and actually just holding on to that wider vision, it can suddenly narrow down and your energies can become, really expended. For me, I think constantly going back to that sense of the ideal, of looking at the music that you're conducting, I'm thinking of the privilege that it is to advocate for that music, for that composer in the moment. And again, to constantly look for solutions and inspiration which will help the people in the room to release the best of themselves and to be lost in making together. And I hope those are thoughtful things, serving the music. Now, in the Zoom room today, I've got some really lovely things. These, the last thing, actually, in the question and answer session in Steph's paper, one of the comments was really good. And the person said that, in a sense, all musical scores, all notational residue, is the product of an economic transaction. And it reminded me, we also got onto the idea of trans-historical humanness. So the idea that the people in Babylonia were making songs and singing them with the same emotional responses that we might feel. and how likely it is that we could possibly recapture that sound and the experience, the response to the music, and whether we hear a particular mode or strings being strummed, a solo voice being lifted up, and whether we as humans can feel the same. And of course, the romantic idea, I feel the same with the Renaissance stuff. The romantic idea is that essentially we're all in one continuum of humanity. So we might call it a transhistorical humanness. But the problem is, of course, that when this stuff goes through our eye or our ear, the mechanisms are the same. But when they hit these cerebral cortex or other scientific part of the brain, which actually interprets the sound and the emotion, it's mixed up against all the categories of our life experience. And unfortunately, those are so completely different and so completely culturally unrecognizable. I mean, there's a dissonance between even 100 years, let alone, hundreds, centuries, that I'm not sure it does mean the same. There's this old saying, isn't there, that music's a universal language. I think music is, but I think the types of music are definitely not. Music is culturally specific, and I think it's a bit banal to pretend that a folk song sung in an Indian harvest field is going to be received in Northern Europe and understood, because neither the language nor the mode is familiar, and it's the categories into which we put things that matter. It reminded me of this excellent book, which I may have mentioned before, I forget, Baxendall, Painting an Experience in 15th century Italy. It's probably old hat to art historians, but to me this is quite inspirational. And the very first page talks about a painting as the deposit of a social relationship. On the one hand there's the painter, and on the other side there's the person who asked him to make the painting, provided funds, and then wanted to use it. And so it talks about the patron-client relationship, which of course all musicians are to some extent subject to, and certainly our Renaissance composers were. And then it goes on to talk about the way that the light strikes the painting and goes through the cornea and up the nerve, but then reaches this mind which has a different set of categories and experiences upon which to map that visual experience and to make sense of it. And I think for musicians who are trying to wrestle with making music meaningful that comes from different times and places, this kind of thing is excellent. Musicology is just such a young discipline, and it hasn't really yet formed its way of dealing with these things in a mature way. It still clings on, I think, to these Austro-German models of the symbol being the music. And what's really weird is that I don't know any musician who was drawn to music by the symbols. All the musicians I know were drawn to music like moths to a flame by the visceral emotional experience of music, and their need to express themselves in sound in real time. And to some extent, everything that you might teach in a degree should have this caveat around it, which is we're all trying to touch that flame, and all of our activities are a dance around that moment, that emotional moment where the music is experienced and is so evanescent and so fleeting that it's impossible for us to conceptualize without destroying it. There, I've said something really, really romantic. That's not appropriate at all. Okay, so what I'm going to suggest now is that you come and join me in this Zoom room, and I'm going to paste the it should be somewhere at the top of the comments, and if anyone can see that, grab it and paste it again. But otherwise, I'll paste it now, and I'll come and see you. So bear with me. There'll be a little hiatus as I grapple about looking for the invitation and pasting it again. But I'll hope to see. I've got some really lovely music to play today. All right. See some of you very shortly, and if not, thank you for coming today. And I'll paste it right here. There we go. To Facebook, thank you for coming, and goodbye. Yay! Brilliant. Hello. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We'll just let them all flood in. It's lovely to see you. Gosh. Because I can't really look at Facebook while I'm talking, I'm never sure you're there. So that's really cool. I'll just keep them coming. Simona, may I make you a co-host, please? You knew I was going to ask. Yeah, thank you. So here's co-host, just in case there's naughty people. Hello. Good. All right, well, I've talked for longer than I meant, as usual. So I'll just get stuck in. Let's see what we've got lined up. So today's clips. Firstly, if this will play, this is difficult to make play, so I thought I'd try it first. There's a Dutch arts show, which seems to be exactly the kind of thing I wish we had in Britain, because I don't think there's a weekly arts roundup with lots of poets and musicians and artists coming in to play and talk in a kind of magazine show. But I found this performance by Capella Pratensis, who, as you know, I'm a bit keen on. They came in to talk on this programme, which is called Podium Witteman. It's a Dutch programme. And let's see if I can get this to play for you. It's just interesting because the incongruity is they're in this modern studio and, you know, they've just been talking about modern art and then they step up and sing some Josquin. So see what you think. Here we go. This is the one that really might not play.
En dan gaan we luisteren naar de treurzang Nymphe des Bois, uitgevoerd door Capella Pratensis.
I'd say that's a pretty good live performance. And what I like about it is the way that the musicians are in the context of this modern studio, and there's a grand piano, there's a string quartet listening, there's some people who've been talking about art. And I wish there was a program actually in that kind of. It's like Jules Holland, but it's for arts instead, and people take seriously what each other are doing, because as people who do something to a high level, they're interested in other people who do something to a high level. And it's not that British cringe thing of being ashamed of something which is difficult or could be perceived as elitist. And this is such a problem, I think, with arts broadcasting in this country. The paradox we have is that we've got hundreds of channels, or at least on Freeview, a good, 35. And how often is it that you see something like that being taken seriously, something which is human and important and truthful, and how much is there that you don't want to watch? And I'm not just saying that in a snooty way. I just think it should be there as a strand of culture, and it's a bit sad if there isn't space for it. I know it's not commercial. Okay, so that's enough of the old man rant. So one thing that really excited me was this group, Cut Circle, which of course is by the way, that a Joscan is just, if you don't know it, of course it's a tribute to Ochegem, and with the composers in procession at the end. It's so moving. So please go and look for that if you haven't come across it before. This group, Cut Circle, they're American. They're conducted by Jesse Rodan, who's a Joscan scholar. And I just want to play you a snatch of this, really, because I find their vowels very European. I think they've consciously gone for harshness, but what it's led to, they push everything through their noses, and it leads to the music having a kind of gate rattling energy to it. It certainly strips the froth off a cappuccino at 30 meters, this stuff. So here's a little bit of, I think, late 15th century polyphony. I haven't checked this properly. Let's see. And I really like the way the group delivers this with real aplomb. Here we go. Come on, that's great. I mean, it doesn't feel very reverential, but do you remember I put them on the list a while ago because they sang Namford de Way with that kind of cry, and the tenor went with a kind of whoop at the beginning. Steve, you're right, it's a twang. It's absolutely delirious, that stuff. Okay, so that's a Cut Circle. And then this group, which I didn't know at all, was introduced to me by Tony Damer. And this, let's find the right window. Zoom is so strange, isn't it? Okay, so you may well know Utopia. They call themselves Belgian Handmade Polyphony, purveyors of. And I thought I'd just play you a little snatch, because time is pressing on, of the Morales Lamentations, which are fantastic. And I think here it's less pointed, but this is really excellent singing. Tasteful Fade. Okay, so the link is in the, but that's a group I'd really like to know more about. I've put them on the Spotify list as well for this week because I think they're really good. I've enjoyed listening to them. And then what else did I recommend? I think the other thing I wanted to, so I won't play you it now. I'll keep it for next week. Perhaps the Labyrinto. Don't want to use up everything. Now, what about this DVD which crashes the computer? So this could be goodbye. But actually, I think this needs to be spread over 2 weeks as well because it's nearly 20 to 2. But I'd like to look at two conductors who are non-classical. So I'll keep the classical ones for next week. This is a video which goes with this book by Garnett, which is called Choral Conducting and the Construction of Meaning. And it is a bit dry, but it has lots of ideas that I found really arresting. And she spends one chapter just sort of taking apart what the conductors are doing in their rehearsals. So if this doesn't work, then it's goodbye. But I think it will. Okay, so it's set up somewhere on here. Let's see. So hopefully you can see something or not. I don't know. It's probably just gone blank. Let's go to the menu and see if I can make it play. It's very slow, so it keeps you in suspense. Oh, hello. Okay, that's nice. So let's go out to the menu and see if we can. Okay, so perhaps you can see something. I wonder if it's going to let you see it. That'll be disappointing, won't it? Just give me a thumbs down if there's just a grey screen. Oh, excellent. Okay, so let me have one more go with this. View, enter full screen. Oh, something flashed up, didn't it? And then he disappeared again. I think I might need to do a bit of work on this to make it. Perhaps get a friend to tell me whether I can show it to you. I have one more go. So it's a very temperamental thing. I think that's going to be a sort of artist's impression of a drizzly day at Dover, unfortunately. Yes, we can hear it, but we can't. Okay, let me play with that and see if I can get it for another time, because there's some great examples. One thing is, there's a gospel choir where she essentially dances and claps with the choir in a way that you'd never do in a concert. And there's a sort of slightly more serene barbershop group where she does a mixture of classical and community work, and I really enjoy watching it. And the point I would make really is that what conductors need to do is to be clear and make their intention plain, and then to energize the group. And it doesn't always mean having a super clear beat pattern. I mean, it can help, but I mean, I'm sure you've played and sung for people with really clean beat patterns who are very uninspiring, so it doesn't follow. You know, in fact, a really clean beat pattern can be quite deadening for musicians because they feel as if graph paper has been put over their gorgeous picture that they're painting, and they want to rip the graph paper away and be released with a bounce of energy, told what to do and how to get there. Anyway, let me fiddle about with that for next time. So it's lovely to see you all. I'm very happy to unmute and say hello, and then I'm going to have my lunch. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, David.
Oh,
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Lovely to see you.
How lovely to see your smiles.
Thanks for having us, David.
Lovely to have you back, David.
Great.
Have a nice day.
Yeah, and you. See you soon.
Good weekend.
Hi, David. Good to see you.
Have a nice weekend. Bye.
Brilliant. And to you.
Right.
All right.
Bye-bye.
We'll close the meeting. Thank you.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye. Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.